In the early hours of Thursday morning, FIFA held an extraordinary Congress meeting to confirm the hosts of two more men's World Cups: Saudi Arabia 34 and Uruguay, Argentina, Paraguay, Spain, Portugal, Morocco 2030. FIFA President Gianni Infantino gave an inspiring address. He said, "In today's divided world, where it seems that nobody can agree anymore on anything, to be able to agree on something like that is definitely an incredible message of unity and positivity. A touching message. There's truly nothing like an elected official who ran without opposition, preaching unity and agreeability on a series of votes with only one option on the ballot. In fact, I have to apologise because that is not entirely truthful. In reality, there was no ballot at all. Infantino quite literally instructing voting members to applaud the sole bids into confirmation. Quite astounding stuff. The 2030 World Cup will be hosted across 3 continents. Quite remarkable. And let's not forget the generosity of FIFA to allow Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay the privilege of hosting the first 3 games of the tournament. What a nice thing to do. Another inspired move of the Infantino era is to reintroduce rules to ensure that the World Cup is rotated between confederations, meaning that after North America 26, Europe, Africa and South America in 2030, only bids from Asia and Oceania would be accepted for the 34 cycle. Now, CONMEBOL, you got your 3 games in 2030. Be careful what you wish for. Saudi Arabia, as it turns out, was the successful bid. Now, by policy, which specifically denies hosts from the same confederation within 12 years, 2038 would have to be either in Oceania or North America. Good luck, Kiwis. Of course, plenty could change between now and then, and it probably will. The hypocrisy of the entire process is laughable. As a part of a presentation on the 2030 bid, an animated Luis Figo, Fernando Llorente and Noureddin Nabet were asked how the bid would revolutionise fan engagement. They were presented with 2 options. A, next-generation apps allowing hyper-personalised experiences. Or B, next-generation apps allowing hyper-personalised experiences. The segment then closed with the line, quote, "That's a great metaphor for the bid. You have to laugh, otherwise you'll cry." They were referring to the teamwork between the 3 nations, but the opaque nature of the self-referenced railroad is astounding. We now live in a new era of World Cup bidding. Selection is not won by votes, but rather favour, traded between member associations, confederations and FIFA. Australia itself benefited from this when the AFC rallied behind us for the 23 Women's World Cup bid. Japan encouraged to step away to allow the entire region to rally behind one bid. It's the new game, one that you don't get to choose whether or not you want to play if you want a seat at the table, on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan, Avil, and joining me eventually tonight is Jacob Stevens. It's been quite the interesting day.
Yeah, nice to finally be able to speak. Yeah, it's remarkable is one word for. I mean, it's just FIFA are just doing FIFA things consistently now, and it's making things. He's, Infantino's right that everybody is united, but perhaps not quite for the reason that he thinks.
Yeah, interesting. Christian Montegan, hello to you. What were your first impressions of this morning?
I mean, they weren't surprising because for months we've known that Saudi were going to be the sole bidder. Ever since the Asian Confederation voted in Saudi and they backed them in, Australia, the FA had no choice but to back out of their bid. Why would you waste millions of dollars in campaigning to lose a battle that's already lost before it's even started? And that's the sad thing about it. It used to be in previous bidding processes. I remember back in the 2010 it was 2010, but it was for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups. Australia obviously put their bid in for 2022. I remember getting up early in the morning, anticipating, Australia might actually have a chance of hosting the 2022 World Cup. I know it was slim. I think UK was in the bidding as well, but it just goes to show how much it's fallen in that there's not even that competition anymore. There's not that excitement. It's just, they're just sort of handing it to whoever has the most money. It's bribery involved. Obviously, there's corruption behind the scenes. We all know what's going on. And it's just sad how it's gotten to this stage. But it's always been like that, though.
Look, the words corruption and bribery are obviously ones that we have to throw around carefully, right? Like, I think that the one part of this, Jacob, is that a country like Saudi Arabia having a World Cup inherently is not an evil thing, right? We can look at this through the lens of their human rights record, which obviously needs improvement. And as part of this bidding process, they have made a number of commitments to improving that. Now, whether that eventuates, we have to wait and see. But the issue is not specifically Saudi Arabia having it; it's by the method of how they got it, right? So, when information came out about the sole bid for Spain, Portugal, Morocco in 2030, we then learnt at that time that the bidding process for 34 would be accelerated by approximately 3 years, and that nations and member federations would only have 25 days or something like that to prepare expressions of interest to submit to FIFA, and no less than an hour, and Vince Rugari did a really detailed piece on this in the Sydney Morning Herald on Thursday, no less than an hour after that original correspondence was sent out, Saudi Arabia announced their expression of interest, right? So it's clear what's going on here, and it's really the method in which Saudi Arabia have achieved the process of obtaining this World Cup is what we take issue with.
I do agree that like there's no problem with any country making a bid to host the World Cup. If you're a FIFA member, you're entitled to do so, and it should come down to the best bid is the one that gets over the line. Now, obviously, what's judged as the best, FIFA are gonna make their decisions on that. But yeah, you're right in that the method that this was done, it was so brazen, right? Like completely transparent almost about their intentions the whole time. First of all, to do this joint bid between Spain, Portugal and Morocco in the first place, everyone was like, you can kind of understand it. They're in the same region. Like, it kind of makes sense. Okay, yes, Morocco counts as Africa, but, they're like in the same geographical area, like travel won't be too bad. But then to just package in South America along with that, give it some rubbish about how it's it's in commemoration of the first ever World Cup, and it's like, that's what a bunch of rubbish, right? Because it's clear now that means that the only bid that can get over the line is going to be one from Asia, and which is the country that happened to bid. It's Saudi Arabia, this country that is funneling money into football like very few other countries are doing. Most of the other countries are doing it being from the same region as Saudi Arabia, in a deliberate attempt to sports wash and try and make people I suppose less or rather more forgiving of their human rights violations and problems that are ongoing in that country. And they just happen to have FIFA eating out of their hand at this point. It's the same thing it's not the same thing that happened with Qatar, but it was a big reason why Qatar got up, was simply the money that they could have to throw at this sort of stuff. And look, I do agree with you that the method was bad, but I don't oppose anybody that isn't happy with Saudi Arabia being the choice anyway, right? Because of the issues in that country. And it was the same case with Qatar. And there was all that talk leading into Qatar about, the country are going to clean things up, right? And they're going to make sure that their human rights record is much better and things. And then you get all the reports throughout the construction phases of the stadiums about migrant workers dying, about forced slavery of migrant workers, of things like that. And it's like, well, what were we expecting? Right? Like, there's a reason why people are unhappy with this choice of country to host the World Cup on the global stage. This is supposed to be a chance to show what your country's about. And if that's what they're showing, and they're willfully showing it, and FIFA are backing that, I think that speaks a lot about FIFA as well. So while, yes, the way in which this bid came about was wrong, I'm also, of the opinion that, yes, people can and probably rightfully should be angry that Saudi Arabia was even an option to be a bid in the first place. Because while they have the right to be a bid because they're a FIFA member, how are they the only option? Why? And it was a foregone conclusion. The moment they announced it, everyone's like, yeah, it's going to be Saudi Arabia. Like, it doesn't matter who pops up now. They've got the money. They've got the backing of everybody else in FIFA. Like I said, they've got FIFA eating out of their hands. So you're right that it's not necessarily the country. If this was any other country, we'd be talking similarly about the fact that the method that it came about, it was problematic, but it doesn't help that the country itself is problematic as well. And so I think it sort of doubles up on that. And that's why people are simply so outraged about it all.
I think us three, and I think most of our listeners would agree in the statement that we all believe that sport in general, but also football. Football can be a good driver of social change, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of human rights bodies have spoken out against the selection of Saudi Arabia to host this World Cup today. There are obviously human rights issues, none more so. Well, no, actually, I don't want to put any of them above either other. But migrant workers coming to the country, that we know that was a big issue in Qatar. Discrimination against LGBTQI plus peoples, and male guardianship and things like this. Look, as I said, there has been a number of commitments that have been made. Whether they follow through on these commitments remains to be seen. But I also want to say, and I think I've made this point on the podcast before, that I think sports washing as a concept is a bit simplistic of a view of what's going on here, and not just Saudi Arabia, but all of these other kind of Gulf nations trying to influence the world with sport. Christian, they have this 2030 vision that is much bigger than, trying to hide human rights infringements. It is about, influencing the world and establishing Saudi Arabia politically and globally around the world with power, right? So I don't think that, these people would sit in a room and say, we are doing all these things, let's invest in sport to cover it up. Yes, that is a byproduct of what's happening, but I don't think it's a goal. And so I do think that lens is a little bit simplistic. I'm not dismissing any of the issues. They are definitely there. But it's clear to see that this is a very complicated issue to talk about.
I think Jacob touched on it a bit there. I think why people are so outraged is because of the human rights issues. And you've seen people like Craig Foster, even, he's obviously a big advocate for it. We saw the Qatar World Cup where, he voiced his concerns even, before the tournament. But once that tournament kicks off, nobody thinks about that, right? Everyone just focuses about the football for that sole month, and that's what it's about, right? No one talks about human rights issues, how many workers died. Over 500 workers died constructing those stadiums in Qatar, and but once that tournament kicks off, no one talks about it. And there is a bit of sports washing. You can't sort of deny that. That's part of why they want to try and sort of cover up what's been happening sort of behind the scenes and attain a better image for themselves. And it's not just football, they're doing it in other sports as well. Golf, tennis, they're trying to get into all these markets, and it's just another avenue, I guess. I see your point, Lockie, but it's another avenue for them to, have a new sort of reputation. But at the same time, if none of these problems are resolving themselves, or these same issues are arising, then why do they keep getting rewarded with successful World Cup bids, for example, or hosting other tournaments? It's because they've obviously got a lot of money, a lot of backing. They've got a lot of endorsements, a lot of ambassadors now behind the scenes. Tim Cahill, our own Australian, being one of them for Qatar, right? So these are the people and the players they're luring in to try and help push this campaign and push these, I guess, causes that people from the outside looking in and saying, how does a country like Qatar or Saudi Arabia deserve it, right? But again, you can't complain for them bidding for it because they have the right to, as Jacob said, being a FIFA member. So yeah, it's sad, like I said before, but you can't do anything about it in this day and age. It's about the money, and that's what it is.
I want to touch on some of the actual processes behind this. So the Saudi Arabia bid evaluation report was released in November. It received a score of 419.8 out of 500, which is the highest evaluation score in FIFA history. Some of the highlights for you: there are 15 proposed stadiums as part of the bid, of which 4 currently exist in full. Some are already on the way for the 27 Asian Cup. So their completion is on the way, but a fair few are being proposed specifically for this World Cup. That has been assigned as medium risk by the report, mitigated, of course, by the roughly 3 years extra time allowance by running this simultaneous bidding process that we talked about, something that FIFA was advised against in an investigation into previous allegations of corruption during the Sepp Blatter era. Medium risk was also applied to the human rights portion of the report. FIFA says the Saudi Arabian Football Federation, host cities and organisations have all made concrete commitments to improving human rights. And to sweeten it all off, Jacob, I thought this was quite funny. The phrase, should the bid be successful, was used apparently unironically 20 times throughout the report.
That's crazy. I love that the fact that the stadiums might not be built on time is A, classified only as a medium risk, but the B, that still means that they get the highest score ever in FIFA history. Isn't that one of the big things about an Australian bid is always, where are we going to play? Well, as it turns out, clearly it doesn't matter. Let's just say we're just going to build 15 stadiums, and then it will just get marked as a medium risk and we'll get the bid and it's all good and everyone will be happy. No, I mean, it's farcical, and the more transparent they are about things, the more you just have to laugh at it, right? Because it's just like, what are you on? Human rights are a medium. There's one that you didn't touch on, which is extremely prevalent for us three, which is freedom of the press in these countries is extremely limited. There were problems with that in Qatar of I believe there were a couple of Dutch, maybe a Danish journalist as well, that were arrested by police just for reporting on the games. Like, these are serious issues, and it's just being almost sort of just brushed away. It's just a medium risk. It's like, what's a high risk in FIFA's mind? I want to know.
I don't know, but nothing in this report.
I want to know what a high risk country would be in their eyes. In North Korea, maybe. Is that where they draw the line? I don't know. Guess how much? Guess. Depends how much money's on the table.
Would it be America with Donald Trump? Maybe. Well, is that a high risk?
Yeah. Potentially. I mean, they got that bid in before that happened, though. So it's. But true. No, I mean the findings of that report or the evaluation are quite amusing, and then the fact that they use that phrase 20 times that's a lot of times to use one phrase, and one especially so ominous as that, right? Like, it's kind of like they know what's coming. We know what we're saying with this phrase should the bid be successful. Surely there are other ways to say it rather than having to just repeat it 20 times. But no, I mean, like you said in the intro, right, you have to kind of laugh about this all because it's just so ridiculous at this point that it's the only option that we have left.
Christian, you kind of already answered this, so I'm actually going to go back to Jacob. But I think obviously one of the very difficult things, and we've dealt with this in Russia and we've dealt with this in Qatar as well, is that obviously Saudi Arabia do have a lot of money.
Yeah.
They have a lot of build-up time as well. I actually truly believe that a lot of what they're going to say is happening. And in reality, they could put on a very, very good World Cup. And that does, put the how do I say this? Puts the blinders up in a little bit of a respect as to all the issues. So how does a regular fan go about supporting, and I know this is a very loaded question, but how do you even watch or support a World Cup like this and even, let yourself enjoy the football?
It's almost sort of, you've got to have a cognitive dissonance, right? Where this was the same thing that propped up with Qatar, somewhat with Russia as well. I actually know a few people who went to Russia for the World Cup, and they said it was a fantastic experience, and the Russians were all really welcoming, and it was a good time there. But, at the time, that was probably the biggest eye-raising World Cup that we'd seen. And then, of course, Qatar came along. There was a lot of this similar discussion where football fans, this is a problem not just with World Cup football, but with football across the globe, where there are going to be things happening, whether it's with players or the ownership of football clubs or managers or whatever it might be, right, that don't align perfectly with your own personal morals and views. And so you have that choice then as a fan, and it's either that cognitive dissonance of you go, I'm still a supporter of my country or of my club or whatever, so I'm going to watch their games and I'm going to support them no matter what, versus this crosses a line for me, and the fact that my country or my club or this player or whoever is stepping over that line, for me is a deal breaker, right? And we saw that with the Super League as a fantastic example, right? Where the fans almost sort of unanimously, collectively agreed, hang on, this isn't right. They've gone too far this time, and they all rallied together and they outright said, we're not going to support our clubs anymore if this is what you're going to do. We didn't quite see that with the World Cup in Qatar. And I think it's because it's one of those things where, I hate to say it, but a lot of people are very selfish. And if it doesn't directly affect them, they don't care. And of course, a lot of the issues with things in these countries are typically towards minorities, right? So, it doesn't affect necessarily the entire population or large groups of people, and so it can just easily be glossed over, and a lot of people will just go, it's only for a couple of months, and then the tournament is done and that's it, and we can move on and we can forget about it. It's the World Cup, it only happens every 4 years, it brings the country together, that sort of stuff. So I think it is about, as a fan, you either have that ability to split your personal life from your life as a football supporter, or you don't. And that's a personal thing for each individual. It's going to be different. There are certainly things that I am very, very strongly, like multi-club ownership, certain owners of certain football clubs. If that were to happen to the clubs that I supported, I would be really tested and be in a difficult situation there. But there are some people who don't get affected by that. So, I think it's all very individualistic. And it's difficult to give a general guide for everybody, because we're all so different and we're going to react to these things differently. But I think, just in general, you can either just distance yourself from that and continue to watch anyway because it's the World Cup, or you're going to be, personally feel like it's crossed the line and that's too much. And I think I don't think it's right to vilify people who do continue to watch it, right? Because it doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely ignoring the issues at play, but on the other hand, we can't also shame people who don't watch it, because it's a personal decision. So I think we're going to see a big split here, especially with it being so recently after Qatar as well, relatively speaking, of course. I think we're going to see a big split where perhaps it does become a little bit that this discourse becomes quite heated between the two factions almost, right, of you should or you shouldn't watch it. I'm very much on the fence at this point in time. I guess we'll see. Like you said, Lockie, they're saying a lot of great things, right? And they've certainly got the money and the time to be able to do these things. And we've seen it in the region, right? In Syria recently, the civil war's just come to an end there. And there's hope for that country. Who knows what might happen in the rest of the region in the years leading up to this World Cup, and things might make a change for the better. But I guess it's going to be a case of wait and see on that.
Christian, what about Football Australia's place in all this? Because, like it or not, this is the game you have to play now. The way these bids are now being decided through favour, it's not just that favour being bought and sold. It's bartered and traded, and you get tit for tat, one for the other. And part of Rugari's report that we released on Thursday says that, specifically in exchange for Football Australia pulling out of the race for the World Cup officially, when they were still considering this joint bid with New Zealand and Indonesia, that Saudi Arabia agreed to drop their bid for the 26 Women's Asian Cup, and in favourable consideration as well, potentially for the 29 Club World Cup to be in Australia. So it goes both ways. And I think James Johnson, more than most of his predecessors, in my impression, is that he knows how to play the game a little bit better. And I guess in the end, that is a good thing for Australian football. But things like saying no to Visit Saudi Arabia, tourism sponsorship for the Women's World Cup, apparently, again, according to this report, that comes back to bite you down the track.
Yeah, I think that's all well and good. I just think the frustrating part is Australia just hosted the World Cup last year, the Women's World Cup, right? And that should have been the platform for us to say, okay, look how well we can host an event of this sort of magnitude, right? And then it's like you can't really win because, yes, you're trading off for different tournaments, like you get the Asian Cup and maybe the Club World Cup, but like the Men's World Cup, that is the ultimate, the pinnacle of the game. Like that is the tournament you want to be hosting one.
But if you can't get the big one, then it's still worth capitalizing on the opportunity, right?
Unless, it's worth it unless over time there is that possibility that we can get a Men's World Cup one day. It's no use trading off for the smaller ones if you're not going to get the big prize at the end of the day. You want to build these good relationships and these favors, yes, but are we going to be treated with respect as well later down the line? Are we going to get one of these? Is it possible? Is it not? Like, you fully understand the FA pulling out of the bid. Like, you're not going to waste millions. I saw a comment on social media saying, Australia should have competed with Saudi Arabia. Don't just, tie your hands behind your back. Don't let them win. I'm thinking, you're not just going to throw away money and just compete with them. Like, if
especially not with things like the Olympics.
You're going to lose.
And political capital as well.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I understand the relationships and keeping that afloat. That's all well and good. But you'd like to think that, there is a chance for us, in the distant future, 2046, for example. I was talking to Jacob before recording, like, if they change the rule where it's not every 12 years, the confederations, you can just sort of bid, anywhere you want, or, each country, there's no real rule behind it, then I think that would be an absolute disaster, because then I really won't see us, hosting a World Cup in my lifetime, that's for sure. So, it's little things like that. Like, I know, even, to be honest, Australia's not even in a position yet, I think, to be ready to host a World Cup. No. I think 2034, we wouldn't have been ready anyway, if I'm being perfectly honest. So perhaps looking at it from a positive spin, it is a sort of blessing in disguise to prepare us a bit more, perhaps for a 2046 bit or later down the track. But for the meantime, we can do all these trade-offs, but can we get some benefit at the end of the day? That's the main thing.
So 2038 is an interesting one, because theoretically, as I said in the intro, it according to the current rules, it would either have to be North America or Oceania. But given all the conversation about Australia's inability to host it on its own, I don't know how, even if you put all of Oceania together, how they would have the required facilities to be able to host a 48-team World Cup. So that seems like a non-starter. So if you couldn't do it with a whole confederation, then you'd either have to go to North America, where the US have just had it. I don't think you could have a 48-team World Cup in North America without the US being involved in some way as well. So then where do you make a concession? Do you let the US have another one? Do you allow the former oceanic country, Australia, to just tag on and help with some numbers? The conversation is constantly going about, do you split up the Asian Confederation into the West and then, the East and Pacific? And we talked about this in the group chat a little while ago. And I know, Matt Olson, who's been on a couple of times, he's a big proponent of that idea. In that case, then we would be a different confederation and would be part of that kind of Oceanic Pacific group and have the ability to bid for 2038. Is there maybe a glimmer of hope, Jacob, that somehow with all these constricting rules, and of course this still implies that FIFA don't change any of them by the time we get there. That's the thing, right? Australia does have just a tiny little bit of hope of getting some World Cup action.
Yeah, relying on FIFA not to change its mind is not the best idea in the world, because they are quite happy to flip-flop on issues. But it does seem, as things are set, and I think you outlined it quite well with it being, North America or Oceania, where, it's going to be one of those two that are going to host that one. I think that the upcoming World Cup in 26 is going to be a good sort of litmus test to see how well, because there's been a lot of talk about the way that geographically the stadiums have been chosen for that 26 World Cup, because obviously, of course, it's Canada, US and Mexico, so it's a joint bid as well there, but there's quite big distances between the stadiums, like 7-8 hour flights between them, and they've tried to group them roughly geographically, but there are still huge distances between it. Similar sort of problem you'd have here, right, where it's just a massive country, so you're going to encounter that. So it will be interesting to see logistically how that works. I think that region is definitely better suited to a big 48-team World Cup than anywhere else almost in the world. You'd have to do a big joint European or South American bid really for it to be effective anywhere else, which is where I've seen other people saying, well, what's going to stop FIFA from having the early stages played sort of almost like that 2020 Euros was, right, where it's just a bunch of different countries, and it's just played all over, and then the knockout stages are then played in one central location sort of thing, and that could be the option as the World Cup continues to expand. And then you sort of the issue of not having the region not being big enough to sustain a 48-team World Cup becomes null and void, because you're just doing the knockout games, and so it's much more manageable. And if that was the route that they went, you could see Oceania. Look, there'd have to be a lot of investment, obviously, into facilities and things, and you'd be requiring New Zealand to do a lot of the heavy lifting for it. But it would be a bit more viable, Or they split Asia, or they completely scrap the rule entirely, in which case it just goes to the highest bidder. And that's honestly, I think that's probably what's going to happen. As much as it's sort of the cynical view of things, I think that is most sort of in line with the way that FIFA have gone about things recently, is just let's get some money from this. And I think if they can sell it to the highest bidder, then that's going to be good. And they can use it as, right, they can go, well, we've got our hands tied here because we either give it to a country that had it only a few years ago, or we have it in an area where they can't actually sustain it. So, they can sort of use that as a bargaining chip for the popular vote, I suppose, and in people's minds of going, oh yeah, it kind of makes sense to just sell it off to the highest bidder, so
that's what state and national tourism boards do, right?
It is that's spot on, and it's what allegedly FIFA have been doing all these years anyway, behind this thinly veiled idea of it being a legitimate process. So sort of the curtains were drawn back slightly with the South Africa bid, and then obviously the ones following since then with Brazil, Russia, Qatar. And then obviously the Saudi Arabia one, which we've just spoken about. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways it could go. I am slightly hopeful that there is a chance that Australia could get some games at the very least, if not host it outright. But it's a long way off, and it would require some sensible decision making, which is hard to come by in world football at the moment.
I did mention this in the intro, but I feel like if you don't understand the context, it may have breezed you past. So I just want to reiterate that the formal voting process to get these World Cup appointments ratified this morning or Thursday morning, instead of doing a vote, you took your ballot, you got the online portal, whatever, there are quite literally 200 association representatives in a Zoom call on a big screen, in front of Gianni on this live stream, clapping as a way to affirm their vote to ratify it. They're literally all just sitting there in their couches, in their desks, clapping along. That's how your next two World Cups were chosen after 26, of course. Fascinating conversation and discussion. Let us know what you think in the YouTube comments as well. We've been having some really good discussions with people in there, so very keen to hear your thoughts. While we're talking about national teams, Christian, the Socceroos have announced that they're going to play their World Cup qualifier against Indonesia. Interestingly, in Sydney at Sydney Football Stadium. That's the game that will take place, I believe, on March the 20th. Now, for me, I kind of had Japan locked into Stadium Australia, Accor Stadium, for the following window. Now, that doesn't rule that out, obviously. You could go back-to-back Sydney. It would seem odd. I'm not sure if one of the states has really gone hard to get that final game, and then you got to put a Sydney game somewhere. But it did seem odd to me off the bat.
Yeah, at first I thought the Sydney game's definitely going towards the Japan game. I think in previous campaigns, from memory, when we've faced Japan at home, it's nearly always
it's
been
almost
Sydney.
always there.
It's
Sydney,
always there. Yeah, I don't remember it being anywhere else. So, I mean, when's that window? Is it like a June, July?
June, July, somewhere in there.
So unless they're not sure about, I don't know, rugby being played there or other events, and they didn't want to lock Sydney in, I don't know. I'm not too sure. Otherwise, yeah, it's a bit strange because I would have had Japan for that game, and for good reason, because you want the best atmosphere possible for those types of big occasions, right? Indonesia, obviously, it's a big game as well. I mean, we need to pick up as many points as possible. So I'm not complaining about Sydney getting the Indonesia game, but I just think it's a bit odd that Japan will go to somewhere else. Probably the only other stadium is Suncorp. If it goes to another place, Perth maybe, but yeah, it seems a bit odd to me.
Well, that's the thing. Brisbane haven't had a game in this process, right?
It has to go to Suncorp then.
I mean, you'd think so, but I don't know. I
Well,
guess.
but Brisbane would have been perfect for the Indonesia one, right?
That's what
we
I thought,
spoke about this, with Raphael Struijk signing for the Raw, perfect opportunity to capitalize on it, and then you get the big game at Sydney. So yeah, it's
Yeah, I think there has to be a domino that we haven't seen yet that is causing all this. So we'll have to sit tight and wait. Let's go to the Asian Champions League 2 draw. Sydney FC have picked out Thailand's Bangkok United in the round of 16. It was never really going to be an easy round of 16 match because you're going to face a winner of the group. They've also got Jeonbuk Hyundai and Port FC on their side of the East draw. So Jeonbuk is the team that we've been talking up. They would be the likely quarterfinal opponent should you get through. But really, at this stage, we said this, last week, Bangkok United, they were in the last 16 of the Champions League proper last year. So forget any notions, and we've said this a couple of times as well, forget any notions that this is like the AFC Cup of last year.
Yeah.
From here on out, there is quality opponents everywhere you look. So there will not be another easy game for Sydney FC in this competition. It's going to be a tough road for them. But hopefully they can get through. And we did find out as well, I'm sure this is already public knowledge, but I didn't realize until the announcer spoke about this. But the East is hosting this year. So for the single leg final, they rotate it between the East and the West. This year, being an odd numbered year when we get to the final, is in the East. So that is a big opportunity, Jacob. You know, we always talk about the West and how much money they're putting into football, but if it's a one-off game in the East, they have to travel all that way, and Sydney don't. That's a big advantage.
Yeah, that's huge. Although for those finals, I don't think it matters a huge amount, the travel, because the other factors at play probably are playing on players' minds and bodies a little bit more, you know, with it being the final and it being the big game and all of that. And, you know, let's not forget the Wanderers able to eke out their result in the East, in the West rather, sorry, when they won back in 2016. So, you know, it's not an impossible task, but it is made a little bit easier by not having to travel as far. Yes, and still a long way to go to get to that point for Sydney, though, because it's going to be very, very tricky from here on out. Bangkok United, you touched on a very good side, likely to come up against Jeonbuk if they win this game. Even tougher fixture there. You know, it's if Sydney want to win this tournament, they're going to have to go through the best sides that are left in it, essentially. Obviously, there are some very good sides on the West who they wouldn't meet until the final anyway. But in terms of sides from the East, yeah, it is really sort of a gauntlet of all of the best sides there are right in the path of Sydney. So, look, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that they could do quite well with the football that we've seen them play, with the squad that we know that they have. It's definitely a possibility. But yeah, like you said, it's not like the AFC Cup was last year. I think people need to sort of reevaluate perhaps their expectations of the side in light of that. But what it is going to do is it's going to be some really awesome games to watch, though. I mean, just really competitive, high quality football. And that's what we want to see from this continental competition stuff, right? We don't want to see like the Mariners last year going to places like Kazakhstan or wherever, and the pitch being just, you know, like a cow field, and it just being torn up and awful, and the football being, you know, low quality because of that. We want to be seeing these really good sides against each other, and the Australian sides giving themselves a chance to prove themselves against some of the best. And, you know, that's what Sydney have got right now. You know, and best of luck to them in this first game, and then any going forwards if they manage to make it through, because obviously the Mariners are out of contention in the Champions League, so they're our sole representative in Asia at the moment. So the better that they can do, Lockie, for your sake, for the coefficient's sake, you know, the better it is for Australia as a whole.
Yeah, look, I think this actually illustrates what's really exciting about this competition from an Australian perspective. You've got Sydney FC, who, you know, kind of luckily coming off winning the cup in pre-season last year, have stumbled their way into a very good team, and you know, we're coming up against good quality here, but, you know, Sydney FC, they could go out in the round of 16, or they could legitimately go all the way and win a trophy. So
yeah,
it's cool for an Australian team to be in that kind of balance of ability. So I'm really excited. Those games will kick off in February of next year. Christian, while we're in Asia, Australian Peter Klamovsky has been announced as the new Malaysian national team head coach. He's been in Asia since 2018, most recently managing FC Tokyo in J1 to a 7th place finish, which is very impressive. He's been one of these Australian managers overseas. Has probably gone a little bit under the radar, but now a really big Asian national team job.
Yeah, from all accounts that I've heard, I mean, I obviously don't watch a lot of FC Tokyo in the J League, but I've seen, you know, a couple of posts from Sasha Pisani talking about his attacking philosophy, plays really entertaining football, and that's just the style and approach, similar to like an Ange Postecoglou or a Kevin Muscat. He just really wants to implement his ideas and style across, and yeah, he's been rewarded with a national team job. And people might say, oh, that's pretty weird to jump ship from club football to international football like that. You know, perhaps he might have had bigger ambitions in terms of club level, moving abroad somewhere else. But we've seen even like the likes of, you know, Alan Stajic coaching the women's Philippines team, and how that opens a different avenue for coaches, and how successful he was. You know, played some really nice football in that Women's World Cup last year. So like it's a new opportunity. I wouldn't have seen it coming. I would have thought he would have moved to another club, but I don't know the money involved. What's the contract like? So there's all that different factors to take into account.
All right. Well, I've been feverishly refreshing the news page of the aleagues.com.au website. Usually the ins and outs, the official squads are released by this point when we record on a Thursday night. They're actually not tonight. So there's been a few drip-fed announcements from clubs here and there, but I'm not going to take you through too much of it just because I don't want to give you half the story. I will say that there did come out of the Newcastle Jets today that Dane Ingham will be out for at least 3 months with injury, a torn pectoral muscle, I believe. So it's unfortunate for him. We wish him a good recovery. But apart from that, let's move on to our weekend look, fellas. Let's start with Jacob for a burning question.
Yeah, can Auckland put it all together on a tough away trip? We've sort of mentioned the fact that they've played almost all of their games in New Zealand. Obviously, they have
I think
the one
Chiefy mentioned that too.
Chiefy did mention it as well. That's but obviously they had the one in Sydney for Unite round, which was kind of just like a neutral venue thing, so a slightly different vibe to it. This is their first proper away day to Australia. It's going to be to an empty Amy Park against City, so perhaps starting things off quite nicely for them. But it's a decent trip to have to make down to Melbourne from Auckland. It's not a short trip, and City are they're not out of it yet, right? We've sort of spoken a little bit about them and how good they are, but it's going to be a chance for them to prove it. It's also going to be a chance for Auckland to prove their credentials and shut up all these haters and say, we won away from home. What more do you want?
Yeah, well, I'm going to ride straight off that and I'm going to say, Melbourne City, are you real or are you not? And we talked about this a bit on Tuesday, but this is a really important game for them because they have only beaten the bottom 4 sides of the competition. So you don't have to win against Auckland to prove yourself, but it needs to be competitive. And if they're not, then that's 3 games against, somewhat quality opposition where they've fallen short. So that would be a real concern for me, Christian.
Yeah, my burning question, I think Jacob will answer with a straight no, but mine is, is Adelaide the real deal? Because coming in 3rd place, I mean, who expected that, right? They're one of 2 teams in Auckland not to lose a game yet this season. I know we've been talking about they've had an easier run compared to some of the other clubs. They haven't faced Auckland, Victory, Sydney, the big 3 in the competition. So that's another test in itself when it comes to that point. But against the Mariners away from home, I think if Adelaide can get 3 points here, I know the Mariners haven't been crash hot this season. We've explained their problems throughout, but I just think the character that would be shown and to get a result away from home there in Gosford, to go the first 7 games unbeaten, surely that says something about your football club that you're going in the right direction. So perhaps we're underestimating them a little bit. We're sort of assuming that they're going to fall off the cliff sooner rather than later.
What happens if they don't? We all look stupid, don't we?
No, seriously, if they keep this momentum up, we've got to really take them more seriously.
Yeah, I reckon you're spot on. Jacob, worst case scenario?
The Jets can't beat Perth. It's going to be these 2 teams are, and I spoke about this in our predictions game, the 2 worst sides in the competition at this point in time. If there is any team that the Jets can beat, it's Perth. They have to beat Perth, or that is it for them for the whole season. Nobody's going to back them ever again if they cannot beat Perth. They've just got to get it done. If they don't beat Perth, that means they're worse than Perth. They're worse than this Perth side that we've seen. That is telling. I think that's a worst case scenario for them.
Well, I mean, I think this is what makes this game so interesting is that I'm on the exact same wavelength as you, just the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
And that my worst case scenario is that Perth can't beat Newcastle. By the same vein, this is literally like the one, like they even have the home advantage. This is the one game of this season that they have the best chance, arguably, in winning. The Jets might have just come off a week of doing boxing training rather than playing any football. Like they might be a little bit out of touch, have to travel all the way over to Perth in this crazy 9:45 time slot or whatever it is over in the east. If they can't win that, devastating. By the way, before we move on from Perth, because we're not going to mention them again, the $1 million tax debt from Ross Pelligra has been settled. Don't fret, Perth Glory fans. Apparently, there was a mix-up in terms of where all the correspondence was going. So the club were a little bit surprised when they found this court notice or whatever it was, but it's been settled. Don't worry. Christian.
My worst case is a potential snooze fest in the Brisbane Wanderers game. So, I mean, Wanderers and Brisbane, they've had at least one or two primetime Saturday games, along with Adelaide, which has been pretty weird to say within itself.
I think they've had the Friday nights.
Yeah.
The Friday, yeah. And the Wanderers have had a couple, though.
The Wanderers definitely have, yeah.
Yeah, they played Adelaide, and I think it was MacArthur last week or the week before. So, yeah, they've had a couple of these primetime slots. I just think if it's a dull performance or nothing really happens, you just want to see, entertainment goals. Otherwise, in terms of a scheduling spot for fans viewing the game, it's just not a really good look. So I'm just hoping for a good spectacle.
I do like that you tried to list the Western Sydney Saturday night games and didn't mention either of the derbies.
Yeah.
That is quite silly of me, yeah. But we know. But that's an actual fixture.
That's a given.
That's a given. Course. That should be the Saturday night game that goes.
Like Paletti, derbies don't count, right?
They don't count.
All right, Jacob, ping from distance.
Western United managed to take points off of Sydney. I think if you're going to want to come up against Sydney at any point this season, it's probably now. They've sort of been a little bit hit or miss recently. Obviously, there's no denying how good they are as a side, and I think we're all still pretty confident they'll be one of the top three teams this season. They're just a bit out of it at the moment, and I think that with Western, the way that they've been playing, Aloisi's starting to get things going there, and I think that this could be a good opportunity for them to take some points off of Sydney, which is going to be something that not a lot of sides are going to be able to say that they did this season. So that could be huge for them moving forwards as they hopefully try and get away from that bottom pack of teams, the four of Brisbane, Perth, the Jets, and then whoever else you want to lump in there, whether it is Western or whether it's City or the Wanderers or whoever it is, Mariners. If they could start to break away from them, getting points for Sydney is going to be a huge help in that, and it's going to also show a bit of belief in themselves, and hopefully give some confidence to the players that they can go on from that and continue to perform well.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's a good shout, actually. I'm going to say that my ping from distance is the Central Coast Mariners to beat Adelaide by 2 or more goals. It's one of those feeling ones, right? Like they're doing it again. They beat the Jets in round 5 after a winless start. They got 2 back-to-back wins in the league now. Christian, you might be right. Maybe Adelaide do just keep winning, but I still do believe they're overperforming with their points tally just a little bit. So I don't know. There's no real logic behind it, but it's just the storyline of the Mariners.
I mean, the Mariners have had Adelaide's number over the last few seasons as well. Obviously, there was, round 1 last season where Adelaide managed to beat the Mariners 3-0 at home. But outside of that, the Mariners have beaten Adelaide on every occasion, I'm pretty sure. So, they definitely seem to have Adelaide's number at the moment. So, I mean, it's definitely worth suggesting that this could be a possibility. Because,
where's the game again? It's in Gosford,
Gosford,
right? Yeah, okay. Interesting. There you go. All right, Christian.
Mine doesn't really have, any sort of thinking behind it. I've just gone with my gut feeling. I've gone for MacArthur to beat Wellington. I know it's at the Phoenix home game, but I don't know. I just sense a bit of an upset here. I know MacArthur haven't had the best start to the season. Defensively, a couple of questions that particularly I didn't have coming in. I thought they would have been better structured. That game against Brisbane where they shipped 4 goals at home was a real concern to me. But I know it's going to be obviously a tough slog to get 3 points over there against Wellington, who are very tactically inept and adaptable. I just think, I don't know. If I had to pick an upset, I think MacArthur have the talent available to I don't know, pinch a win.
Interesting. All right. Well, while we're on the Wellington Phoenix, Giancarlo Italiano did a little guest spot on Total A-Leagues the other day. We've kind of got the third kind of tit for tat in this thing between him and Corica. There's a couple of funny quotes out of it. I don't actually care about other coaches. They never, they have their own problems like I do. I would never try and play mind games before a game. I said he was a little bit surprised at how Corica spoke about him in the press conference after the game. Just suggesting that maybe the comments did get in his head a little bit, although apparently not trying to do. Sure thing, Chiefy, I believe you.
Yeah.
More than anything, Jacob, I think it's great that, they're kind of playing along a little bit and, they're doing these kinds of things and we're getting this rivalry building even more.
It's great for the rivalry. It's great for the game. It's stuff we love to see. But this is exactly the sort of thing that somebody who's trying to play mind games would say. Oh no, I'm not trying. If they're mentally affected by this, that just shows how weak they are. Like that's sort of the angle that it takes there. So it's like if somebody's trolling on the internet, right? The worst thing they can do is say I'm trolling, because then all of a sudden all of it goes out the window and everyone goes, oh, okay, yeah. Whereas if you keep the act up, it does more damage over time. So, whether or not it's the truth, I don't know, but it's the exact right way to play this, Chiefy. I'm a big fan of it.
This is classic. This is classic Corica, though. I was going to say, just to jump in, like, you remember a couple of seasons ago with Ninkovic when he came to the dressing rooms and Corica made this big thing.
Yeah.
Oh, what are you doing in the changing rooms? It's just little stuff like this where I think Corica deep down knew what Italiano meant by his comments, but he just used this, add fuel to the fire. And he admitted that Corica, I think it was after the win, saying he pinned it up on the board to the players to say, okay, this is what they think of us. So he uses every little inch possible to just try and get the best out of his players. So it's no surprise. Go on, Jacob. Sorry for cutting you off.
Well, I mean, on that point of pinning it on a notice board thing, seem to be a lot of football coaches doing that in Australia and New Zealand at the moment. Maybe it's the thing to do, but no. I mean, the final thing I was going to touch on was just how much I love the fact that this is happening here. Like I feel like it's been so long since we've had this sort of battle between coaches. Like, okay, yeah, teams and players and things like that and fan bases, sure, this happens a lot, but between coaches, it's quite rare.
Well, I think interestingly, I think the last good one was probably Bimby and Rudin, right?
Yeah, 100%. So it's been a few years, and sort of wanted something in that absence, and we've got it now. And it's great. It's awesome. I love it.
Maybe Steve Corica is the missing link. There you
Maybe
go.
he is. Yeah.
Christian, here you go. Here's a segue you want. This will be impressive. A few weeks ago, back on Total A Leagues as well, the guys, not Macca, it was Tommy Orr, who's the usual with Vince Ugari. They made a comparison to Ange Postecoglou, and it was Ufuk Talay in terms of the style of play and how, we're always going to go for it. I think it was after the loss to MacArthur, that red card game, when they kept going even after they got the equaliser. And there was that comparison. But I'm actually going to make the comparison of Postecoglou to Italiano. And stay with me here, because obviously they play their football a very different way. Italiano's much more of a realist, and he will adapt his playing style to his squad, where Ange will just do what he wants, and probably Tele as well, I'm not sure. But the comparison that I see between Italiano and Postecoglou, especially where Ange is at the moment dealing with the English media, I feel like they're both kind of misunderstood for what they're trying to do. I've heard so many times now Italiano talk about what control means in a game of football. And journalists will keep asking him about, you didn't have that many shots. You didn't have possession. You were dominating this game. And he goes, well, actually, I thought we controlled their chances to low percentage outcomes. I think we had a lot of high percentage outcomes compared to what they had. And I feel like he's answering the same question over and over again, Jacob, which is kind of what Postecoglou's been doing for the last few years. So he's obviously been struggling a little bit at the moment. I know you want to talk about that as well, but what do you think of that comparison?
It's pretty apt comparison, actually. It's quite interesting. Yeah, perhaps the two of them combined, Corica and Italiano, if you combine them, they become Postecoglou. Because like you said, you've got that sort of firm, I am going to play the way I want to play, and it's the similarities between Postecoglou and Ufuk Talay. yeah, is quite similar. But with Italiano, you're right. It's the way the media approaches things so interesting. He's got to come up with a catchphrase, right, or a word. Postecoglou always says mate.
Yeah.
Maybe Italiano's got to come up with something and just try and stoke the fires a little bit more. But you're right. It does seem like he has to repeat the same answer or a similar answer almost every game. And it works for him though, right? That's the thing, is that you don't mind having to answer that same question over and over again if you're getting results and you're playing well, and that's what they're doing. Obviously, if it was the other side of things, and we've seen a couple of in those press conferences this season where reporters have been asking about things, and for coaches where things aren't necessarily going their way, and they go, who was it recently that said, well, what changes do you want me to make? Was
John Aloisi.
Aloisi. It can rear its ugly head in those scenarios, but when you're one of the top sides in the league, it's a little bit better for you. And we know how much he loves to talk about football tactics and the way that he structures his team to play. And we could go on about it forever because he does in his press conferences. He gives us so much to talk about. But no, you're right in that he's going to get that question a lot, I think, where especially it's a tight game where they go, oh, you weren't as aggressive as whoever it might be that you're up against, and he will have to defend himself again and again. But I think that's also then very Postecoglou-like in that he does back himself and he backs the way that he wants to play. So no, I think it's a very apt comparison there, Lockie.
Christian, what do you make of it? And then what about Ange and his recent form in the Premier League as well? Because he obviously had that massive win against Man City, but the loss at home to Ipswich, he's been flopping around a little bit, and it seems like the fans are at least putting him under a fair bit of pressure.
Yeah, I think Ange is on the similar boat in terms of getting asked the same questions about his philosophy. But, looking out from the outside, you think it does make a bit more sense because Tottenham aren't getting the results the same compared to Wellington, where they've been relatively on top since Italiano's been there. Whereas at Tottenham, they expect a certain style of football. Yes, Ange has ticked that box, but they want consistent results as well, right? So some of the fans, their frustrations are, okay, we're playing this great football. That's what we wanted compared to Conte or Mourinho. But at the same time, if you're going to be so inconsistent, beat Man City 4-0 and then lose to Ipswich and teams like Bournemouth, then I guess what's the point, right? So, I think these next...
Don't support Spurs. It's so easy.
It's Spursy.
Well, it's very Spursy.
Well, for someone who doesn't follow the Premier League, I'm rooting for Ange. Obviously, I want an Australian coach to do well. I think we all do. I know you both are Arsenal supporters, and it hurts you inside.
I still back Ange. I don't care what people think.
I know Jacob doesn't. Yeah. It's fair enough because he's got more of an English tie, so that's understandable. But I think this next window, I think it's Rangers on Friday morning, away from home in the Europa League. Rangers fans will obviously want to knock off Ange because of his time at Celtic. Then Tottenham have away to Southampton. We know Tottenham's a terrible away record, and then they've got United in the Carabao Cup quarterfinals. So that sort of goes pear-shaped. Then Daniel Levy up on the board, probably second-guessing their appointment. But at the same time, Vince Rigari posted this a couple of days ago. Tottenham knew what they were getting into. They knew that they had to give Ange time to adapt and settle. And it wouldn't make much sense to sack him after 2 seasons or not even if they decide to pull the pin before season's end. So I do think for Ange, he will have a bit more time to turn these results around. But at the same time, he doesn't have as much time as I think we may make it out, though he does, because again, Tottenham, I know they haven't won a trophy in years, but they are still a big club now with the financial backing, the new stadium, new training ground facilities. They've got it all really. So the only thing missing is that trophy cabinet, and Ange always wins trophies in his second season. Mm-hmm. Can he back it up? Who knows?
So what are we...
Can I just say here, and I mean, cut this out if it's going to make things too long, but let's say Ange can't put results together and he gets sacked. We've spoken about how him, getting to this point where he's managing a Premier League club is doing wonders for sort of legitimising Australian football internationally. Do we think it has any adverse effects if he does get sacked? Do you think that people suddenly start to go, oh, I see, this is why you shouldn't trust Australians when it comes to football sort of thing?
I don't think it's any different to him, like not winning anything over 3 years and then leaving, right?
Yeah.
Because I think his reputation among football people over there, like, managers and players, I think is very high, right? Yeah. And it's mainly the noise from the fans that have been putting on this. But even if he goes and just wins the Europa League, or are they still in the Carabao or the FA Cup, one or two?
Yeah, League Cup.
That's the
League
United
Cup.
game on the next week, the quarterfinal.
Even maybe not the League Cup, but definitely the Europa League. That would take it to another level. So even if he did get sacked now, I think he'd have enough of a reputation to be able to get another stint somewhere else.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, I think he's got the backing now to say, everyone knows his style of football. But on the contrary, you probably think, can he hack it at a big club in a big league? He might have to go lower and, rebuild himself up to an extent, because that was the argument as well. He's made such this big leap from Celtic to Tottenham. A club like Brighton probably would have suited Ange better, because he wouldn't have as much pressure to get those results. Whereas at Tottenham, there's obviously a different pressure, right? So he might have to work his way back up again. If he does happen to leave Tottenham, who knows? But I think he's in a pretty good position. I know pundits, like you said, Lockie, are really high on his philosophy and his football IQ. It's just the fans at Tottenham, you've got to please them, right? It's all that frustration that's been pent up for such a long time now that it's understandable. They demand results. They're sick of this inconsistency. They just want to see this club on this high trajectory where they really hope that Ange can be that guy. At the moment, they have a bit of doubts now, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, finally today, just want to note as well, a report from Nick McKenzie in The Age on Thursday morning has alleged that officers from Victoria Police's Sports Integrity Unit and Viper Task Force swooped on the headquarters of the Dandenong Thunder, that's the NPL Victoria club, and several nearby homes on Wednesday morning, searching for evidence that matches may have been rigged to deliver betting windfalls. As of now, no match fixing, there we go, charges have been laid, but one to potentially keep an eye on. We know that amateur or semi-professional level sport that is open for marketing is really vulnerable to these kinds of influences, we guess. And, we even saw it in the A-League last year with MacArthur. So that's all we really have, but I thought it was just worth mentioning off the end. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Christian, your headphones lasted about 95% of the way. Pretty good for you, right?
I'm worrying now for the next podcast episode that's going to play out right from the start. I don't know what's going on. Hopefully it's just a bit of a blip, because I've been on a good record. So
Jacob Stevens, we can rub the number off the whiteboard. 0 days since last Christian technical error.
Incident. Yeah, that's right. We're back to regularly scheduled programming. But no, it was a pleasure as always, guys.
Making me feel at home, Christian. I don't mind it at all. Thank you all very much for listening at home. We appreciate your support. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, do all that kind of stuff. We really appreciate it. But we will be back on Tuesday for another recap of A-League football. We'll see you then. Goodbye.